They say parenting is the hardest job in the world and the most rewarding. As a mom, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. But what about parenting with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's? In other words, what about parenting when we're also dealing with things like brain fog, fatigue, autoimmune flares, weight gain, joint pain, and literally hundreds of other possible symptoms that can arise from thyroid imbalance? Getting proper medical care and medication is key. But even on medication, many of us do continue to deal with hypothyroid symptoms or autoimmune flare-ups that can make just getting out of bed challenging, much less showing up as the parent we want to be for our children. This is what we're going to be chatting about today with my very special guest, Rachel Hill of The Invisible Hypothyroidism. Rachel is an award-winning patient advocate and author who's written extensively about topics like this. How can we help our families and loved ones understand our thyroid issues? Her past books and new book addresses this very important topic. We've got some practical, real-world tips for you today, Thyroid Thrivers, so stick around. Hello, Thyroid Thrivers. Welcome back to another episode of Thyroid-Healthy Bites, a weekly podcast dedicated to helping you live well and eat well so you can feel well. I'm Ginny Mahar, your host and the face behind the apron at hypothyroidchef.com. All right, welcome back to the show, Thyroid Thrivers. Today we're going to be talking about parenting with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's. As Thyroid Thrivers, how can we navigate the built-in challenges that come with parenting while also navigating the challenges and symptoms of thyroid disease or living without a thyroid? This is an important question and one that I feel like we just don't talk about enough. So today we're going to talk about it with a special guest, a fellow thyroid advocate and thyroid thriver, and someone who has written and talked about this topic extensively in her books, blog posts, newsletter, and social media platforms. I'm thrilled to be here today for a lively conversation on parenting with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's with Rachel Hill. Rachel, hi, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Ginny. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to delve into this topic today.
Me too. And it's great to reconnect with you. For the listeners, this is not our first interview together. I was just saying to Rachel, I think the last time we talked, you weren't a mom yet. But I had Rachel on my previous podcast, Thyroid Refresh TV. That was about 3 years ago. And we talked about becoming your own thyroid advocate. I don't know if you were, that's been a while, but I don't know if you remember that episode, Rachel.
Yeah, I think it might have actually been about maybe 4 years ago. It's I know we spoke before my first son was born, and he's over 3 now. So yeah, it's been a long
Yeah. Well, for the listeners, if you want to check that out, you can go back into the archives on my YouTube channel. Just go to, it's the Hypothyroid Chef YouTube channel, and you can just search Rachel Hill and that'll come up. You did, we had like an hour-long interview on that, and you also did a 3-minute thyroid tips video for us on, just different simple practical ways that you can advocate for yourself as a thyroid patient. So I'll also put that link in the show notes for everyone. But before we dive in today, I would like to tell you a little bit more about Rachel. Rachel Hill is the highly ranked and multi-award winning thyroid patient advocate, writer, speaker, and author behind The Invisible Hypothyroidism. Her thyroid advocacy work includes writing articles, authoring books, producing her thyroid family email newsletters, and speaking on podcasts and at events about the many aspects thyroid disease affects and how to overcome these. She's very well recognized as a crucial and influential contributor to the thyroid community and has a large social media presence. Her best-selling books include Be Your Own Thyroid Advocate and You, Me, and Hypothyroidism. And you've also got a new book for parents with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so Thyroid Superhero, which if you're watching the video, you can see behind me, that was released on World Thyroid Day this year, so about 3 weeks ago now, and that is for children to help them understand their caregivers' hypothyroidism. So within the sort of age range of, I would say, around 2 to 8 years old. It breaks it down really simply, and just gives a bit of a starting point so that we can begin those conversations about maybe why mummy or daddy feels more tired on any particular day, why we might have flares. And I think it's also really important to make our children aware of the signs and symptoms of a thyroid condition, considering that there can be a genetic component too. It's what I'm hoping will be a really useful tool to many families around the world.
Yeah, congratulations on that. It's a beautiful book, and there's really nothing else like it out there. The illustrations are gorgeous, and it's just, something I wish I had when my son was young enough to still be into picture books, but really a beautiful book, and congratulations on that, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. My close friend Deborah, who is an illustrator by trade, I had to have her illustrate it. She's wonderful, and it was really important that we captured a wide range of families from sort of different backgrounds as well, which I feel like we did with the book. But my own sort of 3-year-old son was definitely the litmus test for it. There was a lot of reading the book to him, and all the questions that he's been asking me over the last year or so as he's become more aware of why I might feel more tired sometimes. Those are the questions that sparked me to create the book and form the basis of what we were talking about with it.
Well, great to know before we, dive into this topic today, that that's a resource that's out there for people. And I just want to point out, I mean, the listeners have probably already picked up on this, but you're joining us today from the UK, which I want to mention for any of our international audience, anyone in the UK, it's helpful to have resources that are located in our own countries, because, we each have different medical systems there. It's nice to have those local resources. So I did want to make sure that the listeners were aware of that as well.
I always say I am British, but I advocate for thyroid patients around the globe. Obviously, what I specialise in talking in can be within the UK NHS medical system, and how I navigate that is often going to be most relatable to people in the UK also navigating that. But yeah, I work as hard as possible to understand how other healthcare systems work, in particular the US, because such a large amount of my audience are from there. So they do sort of ask me a lot of questions as well. But it's definitely something to be aware of in case you didn't pick up with my accent anyway.
Well, and I totally understand too. And I think that advocacy, it's not, limited to geographical borders by any means. And, one of the things that I have always really appreciated about your content is how much you share your personal journey with your audience. I mean, you've been writing and talking about this topic, specifically parenting with hypothyroidism, since you started your own journey with motherhood. And I was wondering, to start, can you share with us a little bit about what it was like for you coming into motherhood as a thyroid patient?
I think whenever I talk about this, I always say that the journey kind of begins when I was newly diagnosed. So I had symptoms, those kind of thyroid symptoms of fatigue, muscle aches and constipation throughout my childhood. By the time I was 16, those symptoms really started to ramp up, along with sort of period issues and migraines and lots of hormonal kind of stuff mixed in there. It wasn't until I was 21 that I was finally diagnosed, which, considering how ill I'd been long for, it's a long time, but I'm well aware that a lot of people take even longer to get diagnosed, or they're diagnosed later in life. But to be finally diagnosed at 21, I was relieved to finally have an answer as to why I was feeling so unwell for so long. But at the same time, it had not been lost on me the impact that it might have on my decision or my desire to be a parent one day. I wondered whether I would be able to fall pregnant, how a pregnancy would pan out. I think when you're diagnosed with a lifelong health condition, often like thyroid disease, you don't know what your fertility will be like. You don't know what your pregnancy will be like while you're also having a health condition and growing and carrying a child. And then you have absolutely no idea what your health is going to be like postpartum, going into parenting, and then navigating everything that kind of comes with that. I think when you don't have any pre-existing health conditions anyway, parenting and pregnancy is such a huge sort of upheaval of your whole life. So navigating that with a thyroid issue was completely unspoken of territory. It's not something that I'd seen anyone else cover, pregnancy or postpartum, and then the later parenting. And so I knew that because I've always been someone that has spoken about all areas of my thyroid condition previous to pregnancy and parenting. So I'd spoken about mental health. I'd spoken about how it had impacted my ability to work. And I almost fell completely out of working at one point because of the impacts of thyroid disease. And the impact it's had on family life and social life and sort of personal relationships. I knew that it just made sense to continue that discussion when I started to go down the route of pregnancy and parenting. And it just felt like a very natural avenue to talk about. And so, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, which thankfully did happen straight away, I had an initial pregnancy that ended in an early miscarriage. And after that had happened, I spent the next about 14 months, I believe it was, really fine-tuning and trying to optimize my health as much as possible before attempting to conceive again. And when I did, I fell pregnant within that one cycle. And from there, I started just documenting as much as I could about that pregnancy and about the kind of answering all the questions that I had myself before going through it. And that's why a lot of my posts kind of cover the the preconceptions I had versus how things actually panned out. And what's been really interesting is having gone through that twice now, because I currently have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old son, as my pregnancies have been very different experiences. Carrying, some people might say that carrying a boy versus a girl is different, but I was carrying 2 boys and they were very, very different pregnancies in all aspects, from even just the management of my thyroid condition. My first pregnancy, my thyroid condition was actually managed really easily. It was not considered an issue all the way through. And with my second one, it actually led to me having more of a high risk status. My levels kept sort of suddenly dropping and I was having extra scans and extra monitoring. And that was much more of a worrying pregnancy. So yeah, documenting all of this it just made total sense to me. I do continue to protect my children's privacy. I don't post their names or photos of them directly on social media, but the actual experience of pregnancy and parenting itself, I just think it's, like you said, it's never spoken about. And the amount of people out there that are wondering, can thyroid patients parent? Can we get through pregnancy? The amount of people that ask me, can we get pregnant? We need to be having those discussions.
Absolutely. And discussions, not just about like medical information, but discussions as patients about what it's really like to weigh out those big questions that come up. I know, like they say, there's no tired like hypothyroid tired. And yeah. I'll add to that, there's no tired like new mom tired. And for me, I was diagnosed just a couple of months after my son was born. It was just a routine checkup. My doctor was like, I'm just going to run a thyroid test on you. Sure enough, I had hypothyroidism. And she had asked me, are you feeling tired or run down? And I'm like, yeah. I have, like, at the time, he was probably 6 weeks old. I was recovering from a C-section. I hadn't slept more than 2 to 3 hours at a stretch because I was breastfeeding and up all night. Of course I was exhausted and brain fogged and out of it. And, while I was madly in love with this new little member of our family, it really does kind of turn your whole world upside down, especially when they're infants, for anyone, much less if you have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's. And I guess that is one kind of thing to quickly note here for the listeners, is that pregnancy and childbirth can be common triggers for thyroid issues. So you do really want to work closely with your doctor to monitor your thyroid levels throughout your pregnancy, talk to them about this, and also after childbirth. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what that looked like for you? You mentioned, you had kind of different experiences with both of your sons as far as managing your hypothyroidism throughout pregnancy. What can you tell us about that?
It is worth noting that for my first pregnancy, I was on just Armour thyroid. And that was the pregnancy that we had my thyroid levels checked every 4 to 6 weeks throughout. And it wasn't until I was 30 weeks pregnant that I actually needed a dosage change. And the general recommendation is that patients have their levels tested all the way through, but that often an increase in medication is often made as soon as you find out you're pregnant to I guess, get ahead of that sudden higher need for thyroid hormone, because it's so important in the first trimester of pregnancy. And my doctor did initially do that. We tested only a week later, and it sent me sort of really hyperthyroid. So we went straight back to the initial dose and decided to instead just do a monitor and sort of watch and wait approach. And by doing that, my levels didn't budge at all. They stayed optimal within their ranges until I got to 30 weeks. And then they just moved sort of more towards the lower end of the range. And I could feel it. I suddenly felt a lot more tired. And similarly to how you said at your 6-week check, it's hard to know where the tiredness is, whether it's from your thyroid issue, whether it's from pregnancy or parenting. But yeah, we confirmed that it was indeed a thyroid tired. Increased the dosage, and then that saw me through to the end of the pregnancy. And I believe we only increased it by about sort of 10-15%. It was a very minor increase. Very straightforward birth, as straightforward and as pleasant as a birth can be. He was born, postpartum was fine. It was a very sort of regular experience. I've always experienced migraines as well, and I did find that they increased a little bit postpartum as my milk was coming in and we were kind of settling into breastfeeding. But apart from that, it was a very sort of straightforward, regular experience. And with the second pregnancy, by this time, so there was 18 months between giving birth to my first son and falling pregnant again. And within that time, my medication needs had changed slightly. So after going through the postpartum period with my first, the Armour thyroid, the NDT medication that I was on, was no longer optimizing my levels in the same way. So my body seemed to alter somewhat after birth. It was a TSH from free T3 was fine, but it didn't seem to have enough free T4 in it. So my doctor added a very small amount of levothyroxine along the side, which can be somewhat sort of controversial within the thyroid world. It's not a combination you see often, but it optimized my free T4 levels as well, got my levels sort of all where my doctor likes them to be. I felt a lot better as a result. I then fell pregnant about a year after that with my second son. And yeah, I don't know if it was the medication itself or just something else entirely inside of me. But all the way through, my thyroid levels they kept dropping. It wasn't until I was about 6 months pregnant that they were stable pretty much for the rest of the pregnancy. But for the first 6 months, we would test my levels. We would see that the free T3 and free T4 had both dropped either to the bottom of the range or a couple of times below, which can actually be sort of quite dangerous and risky for the pregnancy. We would increase my dose, test again a month later. Sometimes it had sort of gone back to normal, and then the one after that it would drop again. Sometimes it had dropped further. It was all over the place. My levels would go back up. There was a lot of tweaking, a lot of close monitoring. But yeah, from 6 months onwards, that was much more a straightforward pregnancy. And by the time I was full term, 3 weeks before my due date, they removed the high risk status and deemed that things had settled, and I was fine to go ahead with a regular sort of birth and as close to my birth plan as the baby would allow us to follow when the day arrived. But that postpartum experience was very similar to the first. It was pretty much a straightforward sort of recovery process. I'd say that the hardest part for me has been settling into parenting each time when you are juggling a new tiny person that needs you for absolutely everything, running on a small amount of sleep or really disrupted sleep. Yourself being a chef, you probably sort of appreciate especially the need to be eating more nutrient-dense foods at that time of your life because your body's gone through a lot. It's lacking in other areas like with sleep. And yet I'd say that when you are freshly postpartum or in that newborn stage, you are probably least likely to be eating really nutrient-dense food. I know for me, I was just kind of grabbing whatever I could get my hands on in amongst the chaos of everything. And so with all of those factors that are often thrown up in the air when you become a new parent or have a new baby, things like thyroid flares are way more likely to happen. Your thyroid levels might take a while to settle. I was really lucky that after giving birth to both of my children, we tested my thyroid levels 4 to 6 weeks after, and then again another month after that. And both times they settled immediately and were optimized immediately again. And my doctor had me return to my pre-pregnancy dose for both pregnancies. So going back to the dose I was on before I fell pregnant each time. I know for some women, it can take their bodies a lot longer to settle back into sort of its happy place. And like you say, a lot of people actually get diagnosed postpartum as well. So that can take quite a while to settle. But yeah, for me, the biggest challenges were during that second pregnancy, and then just kind of finding my rhythm as a parent, but a parent with chronic illness, with the other mums in the community that I was connecting with, meeting up with their babies. I was just often finding that I had this extra complication that they didn't, of a health condition to manage on top of the disrupted sleep, the not eating very well, not exercising in the way I used to, all of that. I think it's just another ball that you're juggling when you're a new parent.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that, you made it through both pregnancies, healthy kids. It sounds like you were able to work with your doctor. So important to have a doctor that you trust, that knows about these things and can help you navigate, through the added complexity of, having a thyroid issue on top of pregnancy. But really helpful, I think, for the listeners who are pregnant or wish to become pregnant, to know what it was like for you with two very different pregnancies. And of course, there's all kinds of possibilities that can happen with pregnancy. But thank you for sharing that with the listeners. And as you said, absolutely. Once the baby comes, it is like, buckle up. It's wild, it's messy, it's joyful. It's a ride for anyone. So can you talk a little bit more about how you navigated through that infant stage with hypothyroidism? Like you mentioned the food aspect, or, fatigue and things like that.
Yeah, so one of the best pieces of advice that I received when I was pregnant with my first child was to batch cook healthy meals as much as I could while pregnant, and to just freeze them. And so we did a little repetitive. If you don't mind eating a lot of the same foods, then it works really well. But my husband and I did things like bolognese, bean chilies, things that you can pack just with lots of veggies that are easy to freeze. I don't know if you have an equivalent in the US, but we have like a shepherd's pie or a cottage pie, it's called over here, which is like a beef mince with a lot of vegetables in as well. And we froze them in separate containers and we packed them away in the freezer. It was pretty much all we could fit in the freezer, and we had probably about 30 to 40 meals ready there to go, so that when we were in that sort of postpartum fresh newborn haze, we at least had healthy meals that we could grab and warm up quickly. And doing that really sort of gave me the idea to continue doing that even now on sort of healthier days. If I'm cooking and I've got extras to spare, I will sort of batch cook and freeze them too for sort of future thyroid flare days, because even though now I live symptom free day to day, and I'm thriving, as you refer to your listeners as thyroid thrivers, I am doing that. Things still kind of crop up in life, and we can still go through periods of flare up. So that is something that you can carry on, whether you are pregnant, not pregnant, don't even think you're going to become pregnant in the future. You can carry on that now. Every thyroid patient can take that tip with them. But yeah, that really helped. I think the sleep deprivation is one of the hardest parts, and it's one of the things that most people talk about when you're expecting your first child. Everyone wants to warn you how tired you're going to be, and it's hard to know what to expect, especially on top of thyroid tired. I think thyroid tired plus newborn baby tired is just a whole other level. For me, I found it really good to reduce expectations. So within the first few weeks, I made friends and family aware that I probably wouldn't be having visitors for the first few weeks. I just needed to be recovering postpartum, figuring out the whole breastfeeding thing. That is a whole journey of its own. And breastfeeding can be harder to establish for thyroid patients, depending on their thyroid levels too. We can have issues with supply and things like that. So keeping that in the back of my mind, I made friends and family aware before the baby arrived each time that we wouldn't be taking visitors for the first few weeks. I kind of just let it be okay to be in my pajamas all day, to be sleeping in the middle of the day or at night whenever the baby would allow, and just kind of let us settle in to figure out that new rhythm. I think the more I talk to other thyroid patients, the more I realize that a lot of us are often sort of high achievers or perfectionists, and it can be really important to reevaluate those kind of, I guess, those expectations going into something like parenting, because the first few months, especially with a new baby, like you say, it's full of so many great emotions and great experiences and first experiences, but it can be so full on as well. That I think it's really important to just give yourself some space to just kind of live in a bubble with your new family for just a few weeks, and figure out the rest as it comes along, especially when it comes to sleep deprivation.
I love that approach, to give yourself that bubble, that sacred space to just, there's so much output of care. You also need the input of care too, as someone living with a chronic illness. And that's a reality. I know for me, it just wasn't even on my radar. Thyroid stuff wasn't on my radar because I wasn't diagnosed pre-pregnancy. It was after pregnancy, and the first 4 years after my diagnosis, my hypothyroidism wasn't managed well. I had no idea I had Hashimoto's. I'm one of those people who does not convert T4 medication into T3 very well. So I had a ton of hypothyroid symptoms. I didn't know that much about food and lifestyle. I mean, my doctor was telling me it doesn't make any difference. Just take your medication and monitor your TSH. And it really made those first 4 years hard with my son. And I always tell that as part of my story. Those are the first 4 years of my son's life before I became an empowered patient and went looking for better answers and found them and got my life and energy back and was able to become the person and the mother I wanted to be for him. And what I would give to be able to turn back the clock and have learned these things sooner. So, just wanted to share that for anyone listening who's like, well, my kids are maybe older. I've already had my kids, but I'm still in this, for others who maybe went through like what I did, where they were diagnosed after pregnancy. And I'll say, that really affected my decision about whether or not to have another child, because that time was so difficult, of just feeling tired every day, all day, from the time I woke up till the time I went to bed. And, I have to wonder, like, how could things have been different had I known sooner, had I been empowered with that information? So just, some more personal sharing for the listeners, because it's so helpful to know we're not alone in this. And there's so much that you can do to reclaim, a health situation, a thyroid situation that's kind of taking you for a ride. And also, if you already know you have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, there's so much you can do to navigate pregnancy, postpartum, having young kids, to make this work for you, which is exactly what you're talking about. And this is just so helpful. I'm like so happy to be able to share you and this information with the listeners. One thing you mentioned was batch cooking. And I think anyone at any point on their healing journey, batch cooking is so helpful. Like, your freezer is your best friend. And I know not everyone has, the space for this. We have like a chest freezer in our garage, and I keep it stocked. I'm always like making batches of bone broth. I call it freezer treasure. And it's like money in the bank. So really helpful tip to, do what you did, which is to put a little extra time and effort. You don't even have to make extra meals, just double a recipe. Put the extras in the freezer. And then you've got something to eat, because that food aspect is so difficult when we're new moms or postpartum, newly postpartum, and so tired, and navigating not just the, regular hormonal fluctuations, but also trying to right ourselves with our thyroid levels so that we can, start getting our energy and our metabolism back and things like that. So really great tip there. You mentioned shepherd's pie, great freezer meal. I'll just mention a couple others that we really liked, like pulled pork, like shredded pulled pork. Like you can do like a chili verde pulled pork or like a barbecue pulled pork, gluten-free, of course. That freezes really well. The bolognese sauce, all kinds of soups can be really, really helpful. Some friends set up a dinner train for us when I was pregnant. So after James was born, our strategy was once a week. It might have been twice a week. I think it was maybe let's say once or twice a week. Somebody like set up this calendar and our friends could sign up for a night and they would show up with dinner and like a home cooked meal. And for us, that really helped with avoiding an overwhelming influx of house guests, like everybody showing up to meet the new baby at once. Like all our friends knew, oh, I'm on the calendar 2 weeks from now. I'm going to bring a meal and I'll get to hold the baby and see how they're doing and all that stuff. So that was a nice way to not only help with food, but also kind of do like a slow and gentle introduction of our son to our community, our friends and family. So just wanted to share those tips as well. But I'd love to talk a little bit more with you about food. Can you tell us, like, how are you eating now? Are you gluten and dairy free? I'm curious, like, where you're at with that, or what your personal, dietary considerations are. How has that helped you? How have you had to kind of navigate that with kids as well?
So in terms of diet, I don't eat gluten. I don't drink alcohol. I had one alcoholic drink to celebrate my book launch a few weeks ago, and that was the first drink I'd had in about 4 years. So bar that, I don't drink alcohol, and I don't do caffeine. Those are the only things I truly avoid. I was also dairy free for about 4 or 5 months a few years ago to see if that helped. It didn't. I felt no different, and I'm quite passionate about helping thyroid patients to understand that dietary needs really do differ. I'm not one for making blanket statements that we all need to be following very specific diets or all avoiding the same things. I know that going dairy-free does help a lot of thyroid patients. I tried it for quite a long time and it didn't help me, but what it did do is it gave me a lot of stress, which in turn sent me down a whole sort of unhealthy adrenal function road. So I think there's a real balance to have with eating in a way that supports your physical health that also doesn't contribute to more kind of like mental stress. And, we want to keep the whole of our bodies in check. So there's a real balance to have there. But I feel best when I'm avoiding gluten and I'm not drinking alcohol or caffeine. In terms of then how I eat generally, I eat a little bit of everything pretty much, and I try to base my meals around protein, healthy fats, and always getting some carbs and veggies, or in the morning at lunchtime I'll have some fruit in as well. And that's really it for me. I try to keep it simple. I try to eat a rainbow of food, bearing in mind that sometimes my 3-year-old in particular can be quite picky with food. We always offer a range of food. Like our children eat the same that we do, and we make a range of more traditional, I guess, kind of British meals to a lot of Asian food. We really like sort of Thai and Vietnamese food. Vietnamese in particular is quite good for being naturally gluten-free and dairy-free for listeners who are dairy-free as well. So we like a lot of sort of like Asian salads and stir-fry type foods as well. We actually had our honeymoon in Thailand and Vietnam 5 years ago, so that's where we really fell in love with that, and we discovered just how easy it is for a gluten-free diet. So we eat a bit of everything, but for me it's really important to keep things sort of fairly convenient in the way that having 2 young children, I don't have the luxury of being able to be in the kitchen for a long period of time making, a 60-minute recipe. So if I can find a convenient, balanced recipe that can be made in sort of half an hour or less, then that is my go-to. And I do have a few thyroid cookbooks that I really love for things like that. There are things like making jacket potato type recipes, but using sweet potatoes. You can get really creative with toppings in terms of like getting protein from things like beans if if you don't eat meat or you're looking for other alternatives. I think as well, it's important to be aware that not everyone can afford to spend a lot on food, and that can differ from household to household. So I'm always wanting to sort of stay aware of different people's financial sort of constraints to what they can afford to buy as well, and just trying to work within that in a realistic way. I think there are very simple changes that we can make to improve our health when it comes to diet, without feeling overwhelmed or as if we can't stay committed or afford that lifestyle. So yeah, I think going gluten-free, I found tricky initially. I've been gluten-free now for I'd say about 6 or 7 years. And for the first few months, I did find it quite tricky, but actually there are a lot of gluten-free alternatives out there. And if I'm being honest, I don't really purchase them a lot anywhere. I never really ate a lot of bread or pasta and things like that. So I adapted fairly quickly. And yeah, like I say, kind of focusing on protein and healthy fats sort of for every snack and meal. I find that really important just to my overall energy, overall mood. Seeing me through the day running around with small children, I find that really important. I implement that with them as well. They have a lot of snacks around things like nuts, olives, cheese, like avocados, peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter. There's such a range available now that you can get quite creative with these things. But yeah, when it comes to my diet, I try to keep it simple. I try to think about what can I add in that would be good for my body, as opposed to sort of taking loads of things out and worrying about food.
Absolutely. You make so many good points, and I couldn't agree more. Really is a personalized endeavor, and we don't win any awards for eating the fewest different foods. The goal is always to have as much diversity and food freedom as we can, and also to identify those foods that really don't work for us. Like for you, you found it's worth it for you to eliminate gluten, alcohol, caffeine, and you've identified that hard line too, which is something I try to coach people on a lot. Like, this isn't forever. Even if you are embarking on something like the autoimmune protocol, it's not meant to be forever. Eventually you want to reintroduce that and get to that point where okay, this is my hard line, so that I can enjoy going to a restaurant, a party, just not feel stressed out about food. Because we're not talking here about like, let's be on this super regimented, restrictive diet so that, there's going to be some like promise of remission or something like that. It's got to be sustainable for you. And as you mentioned, that's partly your unique dietary needs and sensitivities. It's partly your life circumstances. Are you cooking for a family? How accessible are these foods for you? And all of that comes into play. What's your health situation? Are you in like a major health crisis where maybe some time on a therapeutic like gut healing protocol might be worthwhile? So yeah, you make some really, really good points, Rachel. I really appreciate that. I'm curious, is your household, this is kind of a hot topic. I am gluten-free. That's kind of like my hard line, gluten and dairy. And also, there's a lot of foods I really minimize in my diet, like alcohol, really careful about what kind of caffeine. Like I pretty much only drink matcha, and, I have my own bio-individual eating approach as well. But I don't live in a gluten or dairy-free household. Some experts feel, no, you absolutely should say, these are my dietary needs. And so my family has to abide by this too. How do you approach that in your family?
Yeah, so in my house, I'm the only one that follows these dietary restrictions. for the most part, because what I cook is gluten-free, my family mostly eat gluten-free too. I think the only things they will eat that have gluten is they have their own loaf of bread, and we have separate toasters. I have my gluten-free toaster, they have their toaster, and things like cooking utensils are separate as well, so that we're avoiding cross-contamination. But again, if we're making things like stir fries, we use rice noodles, which are naturally gluten-free, and you can get a range of different types of noodles and spaghettis made from like veg and all sorts of things these days. So yeah, naturally everything we make is probably 90% of the time gluten-free anyway. But sort of going back a bit, I have a history of eating disorders too. So sort of the environment that I grew up in as a child was not particularly healthy around sort of like approaches to food and body image, and then getting diagnosed with a thyroid condition quite young, and I saw my body sort of fluctuate a lot. It was the perfect kind of recipe to trigger these disordered eating behaviors. And so for a long while, I was struggling with body image and sort of really severe calorie restriction. I mean, going days hardly eating anything, using exercise as a punishment if I did eat anything. It was a really toxic place to be in. And I would say that I am recovered now, although every day it's still kind of always there, and you're still trying to undo these thought patterns that you had for a long time. And being a mother, I find it of paramount importance to ensure that I don't encourage any kind of patterns like that in my own children. I wouldn't want them to have that unhealthy relationship with food that I had for such a long time and still struggle with sometimes. So I don't want to restrict foods like that. I don't want to put things on a complete ban list. I think if they started to have issues as they got older, I know the signs of foods not agreeing with people. My husband doesn't avoid dairy completely, but he knows that if he eats something high in dairy, maybe sort of a mac and cheese or a really cheesy pizza or something like that, that can give him quite a bad stomach. So he knows that he basically limits his dairy to just a splash of milk in coffee and things like that, and he's absolutely fine. But apart from things like that, yeah, I would never sort of put hard lines on what my children can and can't eat, apart from the obvious, we limit sugar, they don't have fizzy drinks, things like that. But yeah, I want them to grow up with a healthier view on food and diet than I had when I was sort of a child and a teen. So yeah, that for me is probably the main reason why I haven't sort of enforced that on them too. I want them to come to their own conclusions, and nothing in our house is off limit either. If we do have things like chocolates in the house, they know that once they're eaten, they're gone, and we don't tend to replenish them unless it's like a special occasion or things like that. And we practice moderation. I try to limit my sugar. I don't avoid it entirely. Like you said about wanting to still enjoy life and go out with friends and socialize and go to restaurants and enjoy if someone gives you a box of chocolates at Christmas, things like that. I strongly believe that it's just all within reason, and we all need to find that line between, if I eat 2 or 3 of these chocolates, I'll feel okay. But if I eat the whole box in one sitting, I'm going to have a mad blood sugar crash. I'm going to feel awful for a couple of days because my body's just wondering what's going on. I think it's really important for us all to figure out what that looks like for us.
Kind of along similar lines, how do you feel your food and nutrition approach has supported you as a parent specifically?
I think since being a parent, I know for sure actually, since being a parent, I have been glutened on a few occasions, whether that's eating out somewhere or a family member has made us a meal and they've said that gluten wasn't in it, but the reaction that I've had is only the reaction I have when I consume gluten. So I'm pretty sure it has been in there somewhere. Apart from those kind of like slip-ups, for the most part, I've stuck to my diet quite well. And that does support me in terms of having a sort of reduced fatigue and brain fog if I do get glutened, or like I say, in those first few months of having a new baby, when sometimes all you can reach for is biscuits and a cup of tea or something that's not as nutritious. in those few months, I definitely felt it. And as soon as I could get the energy back to get back on top to eating healthier, or, when we were getting the frozen meals out of the freezer and heating those up on those days, I felt so much better. And so that has always encouraged me to then get back on top of it once we're kind of through that newborn phase. And it does wonders. I think what you eat is such a huge part of how you feel day to day. And I think it's a really underrated part of what I like to call the thyroid jigsaw puzzle. So there are a lot of pieces to our puzzle to help us get back to good health and to living symptom free, or having your Hashimoto's into remission, however you like to class that, whatever good health looks for you. There's thyroid medication is just one piece of that puzzle. And I think diet is sometimes a bigger piece of that puzzle, because what we do or do not eat can impact us both positively and negatively. And when you're a parent, you're often already so low on energy and perhaps feeling a bit brain fogged from lack of sleep, or having to remember a million and one different things. Today at nursery, my son had a pirate themed day. You're having to remember to send them in with certain costumes for themed days at daycare or at school, and then the books that need to be returned. And there are various things that you need to remember. You're likely to be somewhat tired and brain fogged on some level as a parent all the time anyway, especially when they're young. And what you eat can form such a good foundation for going into each day with the best start possible, no matter what parenting is throwing at you. I always like to make it clear that I am symptom free and I do live well with my thyroid issues, but life is stressful. Things get thrown at us, whether it is pregnancy, whether you experience a death of a close loved one, or you have a really stressful work situation. When those things hit us, our health is very likely going to move up and down on this scale of how well controlled our thyroid condition is. And there's only so much we can do about those things occurring, if anything at all. But what we eat can be such a good foundation, along with our thyroid medication, along with how we are exercising, or optimizing sleep, or having ways to manage our stress. All of those form a really good foundation, so that when these stressful life events or periods happen, like having a new baby, we've kind of got something to go back to, even when the rest of our health is just wobbling a little bit.
100%, and so well put. And it kind of brings me to my last question for you before we wrap it up is, I was just thinking about that kind of unfortunate reality of being a thyroid patient, even one who's well-informed and is doing all the right things to manage their condition, is that we all get those curveballs. We all face setbacks. Maybe there's a new gut health issue that's popped up, a new food sensitivity we haven't figured out yet. For those of us with Hashimoto's, we might experience autoimmune flares, where some triggering event or like a perfect storm of stressors just sparks this spiral of symptoms that can really stop us in our tracks. So, Rachel, I'm curious, how have you first, have you experienced that as a parent? And if so, how have you coped during those difficult times? I know we talked about food, but are there other lifestyle things that have helped?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. Oh no, I don't have a really good example actually. About 7.5 months ago, my husband and my then 2-year-old were actually involved in a car accident, and they were sort of getting into our car in a supermarket car park when another car drove into them. This was late last year. My husband pushed the 2-year-old out the way, and so he sustained mostly just bumps and bruises, and I guess sort of like the mental trauma. My husband just last week has had another leg operation. He has ongoing injuries that he's still being treated for. And at the time when it was fresh for the first month or two, it sent what was a very stable thyroid condition that I'd had for quite a while. I kind of forgot about it most of the time. I didn't think about it day to day. It sent it completely out of whack because we had this huge stressor of My husband was in the hospital for a week. I couldn't get there to see him because I had my 2 young children to look after now, almost as a single parent, solo parenting. And they couldn't come to the hospital. They weren't allowed in that particular area of the hospital. So I couldn't get there without someone else taking care of them. But my older son was going through a lot of mental trauma from the incident, and he didn't want to be away from me. So there were all these logistics associated with it that I was suddenly a lot more physically fatigued, and mentally sort of drained, and having to carry so much. My, again, dietary things kind of went out the window because you go into, I guess, survival mode when chaos arrives, and various things got put on pause. I was no longer exercising, I guess, for enjoyment. Like, instead of doing yoga in the evenings, I was just so fatigued by the time that the children were in bed. There was no extra time or energy to do that level of exercise. The exercise I was getting was running around all day, just trying to do the work of 2 parents, as well as, taking care of my husband who was in hospital. And it was such a crazy time that I spoke about quite publicly on social media because, like you say, knowing how to navigate chronic illness and parenting in those kind of, I guess, times of chaos, we don't really talk about it, but we all get thrown these curveballs while having thyroid disease and parenting, and knowing how to navigate that can feel nigh on impossible. I know for me, again, pulling things back to trying to keep things as basic as possible definitely helped me in that time. I knew that if I continued to do too much, that my health would just continue to be on this downward curve, and that the longer that would happen, the harder it would be to recover it later on. So I tried to draw back as much as I could in other areas. So I didn't do any additional exercise than I really had to, so that I wasn't physically overexerting myself and sort of leading into a flare or a worsened state of health. Mentally, I drew back on as much as I could. So with my work, and my thyroid advocacy work is my full-time job, I paused a lot of projects. I rescheduled a lot of things like this, speaking, public speaking events and podcasts and interviews, rescheduling things like that just, they weren't a necessity at that time of crisis. And in terms of diet, I would say that is one of the areas that really took a hit for a while. It did often come down to convenience foods because I hadn't prepared for this sudden this sudden sort of tragic event to hit, that the freezer wasn't fully stocked, or at least we didn't have meals to take us past the first week or so. So I did start to pull in from friends and family. People would drop off more nutritious meals for us, or if I did go to order something like takeaway, I would opt for sort of a healthier takeaway. Things like, there are quite sort of trendy takeaway options these days where you can order sort of things like salads and sort of like salad noodle options and things like that as well. And there were sort of small things like that made me feel like I was, I guess, keeping on top of those areas just enough until we could get through to things calming down a bit more, and we could get back on top of it. But yeah, I guess at the time I had to reassess everything in terms of what is absolutely necessary and what can I compromise on for the next few weeks, until we got to the point where my husband was home. And initially, he couldn't get out of bed and move at all, but through physiotherapy, he could gradually do more and more. And as we could get back towards our normal, things like what we were eating or my exercise and those kind of things, they could slowly sort of take over a bit more time in the day-to-day as we found our new balance. But I think it's really tricky whenever you go through a period like that. And my example will sort of feel extreme in some cases in terms of the sort of life events that can come up and challenge you, and it will be nowhere near what other people are experiencing in terms of the people losing jobs, losing their homes, losing loved ones, as opposed to them sort of being injured from an incident like this. So it's, as with anything, it's a really wide scale, and I think it's really important to review all of these aspects in terms of how you personally work within your family and within your household, and the kind of support that you have close by. If you have people who can help watch your children for a while, or If your children have friends and, those parents are happy to take your child for a play date for an hour or two, just to kind of give you an hour to maybe squeeze a bit more sleep in, or to cook yourself something nice and nutritious, or do some yoga if that's what's going to help you. It's, I don't think there's any easy way there's no easy formula in those times, but I think the bare bones are to sort of draw back and really reassess what is absolutely necessary just to get through that time of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear a lot of basic self-care and prioritizing as far as, your work and your responsibilities went during that time, cutting away anything that was not essential and giving yourself that, a little more breathing room to find the time to lay down, to cook a meal, to, do whatever you needed to do, take a bath or whatever to get through that. But oh my gosh, how terrifying. I'm so sorry to hear that you went through that. And thank goodness your family's okay. Oh my gosh. Wow. What an ordeal.
I know it was, I think since being diagnosed, that's probably, bar sort of like pregnancies, the second pregnancy in particular, that sort of period last year was probably the biggest knock that I've had to my thyroid health so far, because it was just, it was knocking things in various ways, from the sort of mental stress to the physical stress. I wasn't sleeping well because my 2-year-old was up a lot in the night having night terrors, reliving the incident, and then my husband needing that physical support because he couldn't do anything for himself to begin with. When you're being pulled in so many different directions, you just kind of go into survival mode. And I think I was able to run on, I guess, adrenaline and just kind of pushing through for a few weeks. And then I did get to a point where I crashed and I was in a thyroid flare for a good week or so. And at that point, we really did have to pull in a lot of friends and family to come round every day while I rested, while my husband rested so that he could recover, and the children's were sort of being looked after as much as possible by other people. Or, even if I couldn't sleep, I would be sat there on the sofa, I guess, kind of like guiding them on, he needs this, he needs that, and kind of offering that kind of support while I just sat and physically was able to rest in that way, so that I wasn't running around seeing to everyone constantly. It's I think it's just an ongoing thing. I think one of the misconceptions with having a health condition like hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's is that we have this checklist, and once you tick all of these things off, you get the right thyroid medication, you go gluten and dairy free, you swap out high cardio for yoga and walks and things like this. Once you do all these things, you're in remission and you're good, you're set for life, and it's all under control, and you just sort of carry on. And I think that's one of the big misconceptions, is that it often kind of wavers and moves up and down as we're kind of going through life, and we have these different experiences, whether it be pregnancy or other big life events, or even other hormonal shifts like the perimenopause and menopause. They can cause a big shift again for people who have previously had their thyroid condition quite well managed. I think it's really important to sort of keep talking about how it's okay for things to move. We just continue to keep figuring it out, and it helps if we kind of learn to move along with it and just ride it a little bit while still endeavoring to figure out what it is we need to do to get ourselves back on track.
I think that's where the food lifestyle, those practices can help us right ourselves. I always think of like that threshold of stressors, and it could be one event. It could be like multiple smaller events. Like it's summertime and I'm staying up too late and socializing a lot. So, maybe consuming more foods I know aren't right for me, drinking more drinks I know aren't the best for me. Yeah. And then I have a big physical adventure day and boom, face plant. I'm on the couch for the next 3 days with no energy. I mean, it can be so many things. And this pressure we put on ourselves, if I just do it perfectly. And I know I've experienced that and fallen prey to that, especially as a health coach now. It's like, if I have a gut health issue pop up or end up in a flare, it's like, what did I do wrong? And sometimes life just happens.
Yeah.
And I think you touch on that. We can control the things we can control, and the other stuff we can learn to manage. We can learn to navigate. We can learn how to prioritize what's essential. We can learn, how can I right myself more quickly from this flare, whatever it is. This
Yeah.
But that happens to all of us, even those of us who are well informed, who are doing all the things, who know, how to thrive with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's. There's only so much we can do. And it's like, it makes me think of that quote, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, some other areas that like we've not touched on when it comes to going through stressful periods, general parenting, or in flare periods, as well. Other things that you can do to help yourself, like just get to bed on time. Just don't be staying up late
Yeah.
night after night. Give yourself a hard time that electronics need to be off. For a lot of people, that's like sort of 8 o'clock onwards in the evening. Blue lights, electronics off, have a wind down period of an hour or two, and then get to bed and get your body into this rhythm of having sleep at a set time. I know as a parent, it's really tempting, and I'm not perfect at this, but it's really tempting to put my children to bed at 7:30 in the evening, usually, and then spend 3 or 4 hours sitting up doing nothing much, sometimes just scrolling on my phone or kind of getting things done around the house, because I feel like I need that time to myself because I've been parenting all day and now I need time to myself. But a lot of the time what my body needs is actually to be in bed at the right time, so that when my youngest is waking up at 5:30 in the morning, which he does a lot at the moment, he's a very early riser. If I'm going to bed at midnight and being woken up at 5:30, I can only do that for a couple of days before I'm in flare territory. So stocking up on that sleep and getting into the habit of getting to bed sort of by 10, 10:30 every night. If I'm up at 5:30 the next day, at least I've had a good solid sort of 7-ish hours, which is really like the minimum that my body needs to function in the right way without going into a flare. I think that as a parent is highly underrated. Getting yourself to bed on time and optimizing your sleep. We can't always stop our children from waking up early, but we can get ourselves to bed a bit earlier, perhaps. And looking at things like our vitamin and mineral levels too. So it's really important that you obviously test your levels before you take anything. But if you are really tired and your thyroid levels are perhaps coming back okay or optimized, it's also worth looking into things like your vitamin D, your iron, your B12 levels. Those are often low with hypo and Hashis as well. And a lot of people put their tiredness down to parenting tired, which it can be a thing. But if it is from something like that, from a low vitamin level that can be corrected through supplementation, that can help you a ton as well. And when you're going through particularly stressful periods, or one of the things I find particularly difficult about parenting is that my children are constantly bringing home new colds, new sort of sickness bugs, and I do get a fair share of them myself too. So trying to keep on top of things like vitamin C and selenium and various supplements that can help to support your immune system, as well as making sure that things like your vitamin D and your iron levels are optimal. Those can support your immune system too. So just worth sort of touching on those as a parent as well, I think, because they can form a really good foundation to our health when we're kind of being hit from all sides, that all the things that parenting kind of throws at us too.
Great practical tips and advice to wrap up the show with. Thank you so much for being here with us, Rachel, and for sharing your experience with the listeners, with all of us, and for also just for all the important work that you do as a thyroid advocate and a speaker and author. I know you've inspired and empowered just thousands of patients. So thank you on behalf of me and the listeners today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a really, really interesting topic to talk about. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you online?
Yes, so I'm across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my website. If you just stick the invisible hypothyroidism into Google or any of those channels, you will find me on there. I come up as Rachel Hill, the invisible hypothyroidism. My social media I am really active on, and you're free to reach out to me on there. Obviously, I can't give medical advice, but I can certainly point you to resources if you need them, on where to get sort of particular information on things if I can't help myself. And then my website, theinvisiblehypothyroidism.com. I've been blogging and writing on there for about 7 or 8 years now, and I believe I have over 600 articles on sort of all the areas of living with thyroid disease on there. So if you're looking for information on anything from different thyroid medication options and understanding your test results to parenting and flare days and employment and working with thyroid issues, then it's all in there. So yeah, hopefully whatever you're looking for, I've covered it. And if I haven't, let me know, as I am constantly adding to my list of topics to make sure we get talking about more often.
Awesome. I will put those links in the show notes for the listeners as well. And don't forget to check out Rachel's newest book, Thyroid Superhero, A Kid's Guide to Understanding Their Grown-Ups Hypothyroidism. Is that available just anywhere books are sold?
Yes, anywhere you usually find them. Amazon in particular, I think is the obvious one. But yeah, that should be worldwide as well. But if you're having issues, reach out to me. I do have a stack here in my home office too, so I can always personally send them out if you have any problems.
And for the listeners, if you're a parent who has had to learn how to juggle parenthood with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, we'd love to hear what your biggest challenges have been or what you found that has maybe helped you along the way. So if you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment for us below. And if you've enjoyed today's show, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review. You taking that extra second really does so much to support Thyroid-Healthy Bites. Thank you for sharing this time with us today. I'm Jenny Mahar, wishing you the best of health. See you next time.